there! Mandatory79 here, and I'm back with another deck profile video for the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game. In today's video, the deck profile I'm going to be doing one for is Premium Formats, Kageros, Dragonic Lawkeeper with Divine Dragon Knight Barakat. Alrighty then, let's get started. Alrighty, with the main deck, we begin with the starting unit. For the starting unit of this deck, we have the Grade 0, Lizard Soldier Conroe. Starting unit, Grade 0, Lizard Soldier Conroe. By my opinion, he's one of the best starting units for the Kagero clan's G standard format. For his skills are, the first skill, when ridden on top of by a Kagero unit, you may move Conroe from your soul to the rear guard. So this first skill will allow Conroe to serve as a 5,000 booster from the back row and also a rear guard whose skill you can use later. And his second skill, the best skill for this unit, as a rear guard, by counterblasting one and retreating Conroe from your rear guard, you may search your deck for any grade 1 or less Kagero unit and add it to your hand. So ideally with this second skill, you can search your deck for either a perfect guard, a heal trigger to use for generation guard costs, or any other grade 1 or less unit you wish to use for your main strategy or to help you out later in the game. And with that, just about covered the starting unit. So next, let's head on to the Grade 1 lineup. And now for the Grade 1 lineup. For the Grade 1s in this deck, we have 4 Lava Flow Dragons, 4 Flame of Hope Eremos, and 4 Wyvern Strike Membois. The Grade 1 Lava Flow Dragon, its skills are, the first skill, when ridden or called, you may check the top 5 cards of your deck for a Grade 3 and add it to your hand. And if a Grade 3 was added to your hand by this unit's skill, you must then discard 1 card from your hand as a cost. So for this first skill, it more or less makes Lava Flow a basic Grade 3 searcher for the Cardfight Vanguard V Standard Formats Kagero decks. For as long as you don't mind discarding 1 card afterwards, it'll help you increase your chances of getting a specific Grade 3 you wish to ride to, or giving you a Grade 3 to ride to in case you fail to get any in your starting hand. And the second skill of Lava Flow, as a Vanguard or a rear guard, during your turn, if you have more rear guards than your opponent, your rear guard or Vanguard Lava Flow gets plus 5,000 power. So with this second skill, Lava Flow can serve as either a 13,000 power attacker from the front row or a 13,000 power booster from the back row, as long as you manage to clear out your opponent's field of rear guards beforehand. The Grade 1 Flame of Hope Eremo, its skills are, the first skill, when boosting, this unit gets plus 3,000 power until the end of the battle. So with the first skill, Eremo can serve as a 11,000 power booster from the back row. And the second skill of Eremo, whenever your opponent's rear guard is retired, you may retreat Eremo from your own rear guard. If the cost isn't paid, you can draw 1 card and countercharge 1. So if you play decks that specialize in wiping out your opponent's rear guards, this skill will help you out, as it can not only let you countercharge 1 to give you more counterblast to work with, but also stock out your hand of extra cards to work with in offensive and defensive situations. The Grade 1 Wyvern Strike Membois, its skill is, as a rear guard, whenever it boosts, if your opponent has no rear guards until the end of the battle, if your opponent wishes to guard from their hand against the boosted attack, they must use 2 or more cards at the same time. So with this skill, as long as you manage to clear your opponent's field of rear guards before making any attacks, the unit that this unit boosts will have its attack with more pressure, seeing as how the opponent will either be forced to guard with more cards in their hand or to not be able to guard at all if they are unwilling to use the 2 or more cards at a time defense pressure. And of that just about covers the deck's Grade 1 lineup. Next, let's get on to the Grade 2 lineup. And now for the grade 2 lineup. For the grade 2s in this deck, we have 4 Break Breath Dragons, 4 Torque Cannon Dragons, and 4 Spillover Dragons. The grade 2 Break Breath Dragon, its skills are: the first skill, as a rear guard, after this unit's attack, on the turn that you've already managed to retire a rear guard beforehand, you may retreat Break Breath from your rear guard. If the cost isn't paid, you can draw 1 card. So after attacking with Break Breath, as long as you manage to retire an opponent's rear guard beforehand, either by attacking or by skill, as long as you don't mind clearing out Break Breath from your own field, you can use him to let you draw more cards in your hand to either use for hand cost or to guard with later during your opponent's turn. And the second skill of Break Breath, when ridden on top of, you can retire one of your opponent's rear guards. And if no rear guards are retired by this unit's skill, you can then draw 1 card instead. So for the second skill, it's mainly used as a Vanguard. If you're fortunate enough to ride Break Breath Dragon as your grade 2 Vanguard, and when it's time to ride to grade 3 on top of him, you can have the option of retiring an opponent's rear guard, but also, in the event the opponent has no rear guards to retire, you can instead restock your hand of more cards by drawing thanks to this second skill. So overall, Break Breath is a great card to have in your rear guard and Vanguard with its 2 separate skills. Torque Cannon Dragon, grade 2. Its skill is, as a Vanguard or a rear guard, once per turn, you can counterblast 1 and send a normal unit from your drop zone to the bottom of your deck. If the cost has been paid, you can retire one of your opponent's grade 2 or less rear guards, and after retiring, if you have 4 or less cards in hand, you may draw 1. So for this skill, Torque Cannon is a good way to not only clear your opponent's field of rear guards, but also slightly restock your deck with cards in order to avoid decking out. And also, as long as you don't mind having a small hand size when using this unit's skill, you can also increase your hand size with the draw 1 bonus thanks to this unit's retiring skill. The grade 2 Spillover Dragon, as a rear guard, after the attack this unit was boosted, you may counterblast 1 and move your rear guard spill over into your soul. If you've done so, you may retire one of your opponent's grade 2 or less rear guards. So this is more or less like a standard retiring skill for Kagero clan, except it's also a good way to restock your Vanguard with souls for later Soul Blast, as long as you manage to boost this unit from the back row and you're willing to pay for the counterblast 1 afterwards, making Spillover a good card to not only retire your opponent's rear guards, but also increase the amount of cards you wish to have in your soul for later Soul Blast costs, like I mentioned before. And with that, just about covered the deck's grade 2 lineup. Next, let's get on to the grade 3 lineup. And now for the grade 3 lineup. For the grade 3s in this deck, we have 4 Dragonic Lawkeepers, 3 Blazing Flare Dragons, and 2 Fire Rage Dragons. The grade 3 Dragonic Lawkeeper, the main grade 3 to ride this deck. Its skills are: the first skill, as a Vanguard, at the start of each player's battle phase, you may counterblast 1 and soul blast 1. If the cost has been paid, then for every 3 of you and your opponent's rear guards in the field, your opponent is forced to choose one of their own rear guards and bind it. Then at the end of the turn that this unit's skill was played, your opponent can call back the bound rear guard back to their field, but except their auto abilities cannot be activated upon calling. So with this first skill, if you manage to gather a huge number of rear guards in your field and your opponent has done the same, at the mere cost of Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, your opponent will be forced to bind them in either your turn or your opponent's turn in their battle phases, making it a good way to not only wipe out your opponent's field of rear guards during your battle phase, but also giving your opponent fewer attacks or fewer powerfuler attacks to attack you with, making this a very powerful skill for both offensive and defensive strategies. And the second skill of Dragonic Lawkeeper, as a Vanguard, if your opponent has no back row rear guards, all of your units get plus 5,000 power. And if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, and if they have no rear guards, all of your units get additional 5,000 power. This skill is also active during the opponent's turn, so just like this first skill, the second skill is active in either your turn or your opponent's turn. as long as you manage to wipe out your opponent's rear guards beforehand, not only can you give all your units plus 5,000 power, but under the conditions, you can also give additional 5,000 power, so making it possible to have a total of plus 10,000 power to your Vanguard or all your rear guards during either player's turn. Once again, making Dragonic Lawkeeper a very powerful Vanguard to have as a offensive and defensive measure. The Grade 3, Blazing Flare Dragon. Its skills are, the first skill, as a Vanguard or a rear guard, once per turn, you can Soul Blast one or more cards, then choose one of your opponent's rear guards for each Soul Blast paid for this cost and retire it. Then, if this unit is in the Vanguard circle, and if 5 or more cards were Soul Blasted for this unit's cost, your opponent is forced to remove all their imaginary gift markers from their circles and hand. So with this first skill, as a Vanguard or a rear guard, it's a good way to clear your opponent's rear guards as long as you don't mind Soul Blasting 1 for each rear guard which you retire. But if used as a Vanguard and Soul Blasting 5, you can also wipe out your opponent's field of all imaginary gifts, Force and Excel and Protect 2, but also wipe out all the imaginary gift protects in their hand, making this a powerful skill to wipe out your opponent's offense and defense. And the second skill of Blazing Flare Dragon, as a Vanguard or rear guard, when this unit attacks, you may Soul Charge 1, and if your opponent's Vanguard is Grade 3 or greater, and if they have no rear guards, after the Soul Charge, the attacking Blazing Flare Dragon gets plus 10,000 power until the end of the battle. So this second skill is a good way to not only restock your Vanguard with souls to use for later Soul Blast, but also to give you a 23,000 power attacker from the front row with Blazing Flare Dragon. The Grade 3, Fire Rage Dragon. Its skill is, as a Vanguard or rear guard, when written or called, you may Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1. If the cost isn't paid, you may send the top card of your deck onto the drop zone, then retire the same number of rear guards on your opponent's field as the grade of the dropped card from your deck for this unit's skill. And in the event that no rear guards are retired by this unit's skill, you can instead give the Fire Rage who activated this skill plus 1 critical until the end of the turn. So for Fire Rage Dragon is a great card to have as either a Vanguard or rear guard, because not only does it skill that you have the potential of wiping out your opponent's rear guards, but under the right conditions, he can instead have a plus 1 critical, so a good card to have if you wish to clear your opponent's field of rear guards, and also making him a very high damage giving rear guard or Vanguard from the front row. And with that, we just about covered the deck's Grade 3 lineup. Next, let's get on to the trigger lineup. And now for the trigger lineup. For the triggers in this deck, we have 1. Dragon Deity King of Resurgence, Dragvita, over trigger. 4. Dragon Dancer, Palomas, critical triggers. 3. Dragon Dancer, Tiklas, critical triggers. 4. Wyvern Guard Paris, draw triggers. 2. Mother Orc Dragons, heal triggers. And 2. Dragon Dancer Nastasia, heal triggers. The Grade 0, over trigger, Dragon Deity King of Resurgence, Dragvita. Like any other over trigger in the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game, it features the same effect. When revealed in either a drive check or a damage check, by removing the over trigger from play, you may draw 1 card and give 1 unit on your field 100 million power. And Dragvita also features its own personal skill. When during your turn, if revealed during a drive check, you may also restand your Vanguard. So overall, this is a very powerful card despite only being allowed to have 1 of it. The usual 100 million power for offensive purposes, the 50,000 shield for defensive purposes, and also the restanding of your Vanguard of its own ability makes it a very useful card to have in the premium format and D standard format. The Grade 0, critical trigger, Dragon Dancer Paloma. Her skill is, when discarded from your hand for a stride cost, she becomes a Grade 3 during that discard. So more or less, Paloma is treated as more or less like a stride fodder for the Kagero clan's G standard format and premium format. The Grade 0, critical trigger, Dragon Dancer Tikla. Her skill is, as a rear guard, Generation Break 1. Whenever your Vanguard attacks, you may move your rearguard Tikla into the soul. If the cost is paid, you may draw one card and give the attacking Vanguard plus 10,000 power until the end of battle. So Tikla is a good way to not only restock your soul with cards for Soul Blast later, but to also restock your hand if the draw one card, and also to give your attacking Vanguard plus 10,000 power, making its attack much more likely to hit the opponent. The Grade 0, Draw Trigger, Sentinel, Perfect Guard, Wyvern Guard Barré. Like any other Perfect Guard in the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game, it features the same skill and activation. When used to guard with, you may discard one card from your hand. If the cost is paid, the attacking unit's attack is blocked. The Grade 3, Heal Trigger, Heal Guardian, Dragon Dancer Nastasha. Her skills are: the first skill, when used to guard with, if you have not yet risen to Grade 3 during the fight, you may activate one of two effects. The first effect, your Vanguard gets plus 10,000 power until the end of the battle. So for this first effect, it's a defensive ability to stop your opponent from rushing you too early by preventing them from using too many attacks from their side to rush you into having too much damage early in the game. And the second effect of Nastasha, you may give the attacking unit -2 critical, so just like the first effect is to stop your opponent from pushing you to having too much damage early in the game, while the first one plus 10,000 power to your Vanguard is to stop your opponent from rushing you with a large number of attacks. The -2 critical effect is to stop a very powerful attack from pushing you too much. And with that just about covers the deck's trigger lineup. Next, let's get on to the deck's G zone. And now for the G zone. For the G zone, let's first start out with the G units. And for the G units of this deck, we have 1. Progenitor Dragon of Lightning Flame, Gilgal. 1. Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Blazing Burst Dragon. 2. Divine Dragon Knight, Barakat. 4. Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Blade Master Titan. 2. Flare General, Dumbshit Valor. 1. Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Zanbust Dragon. And 1. Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Exen Grave Dragon. The Grade 4, G Unit, Progenitor Dragon of Lightning Flame, Gilgal. The Progenitor Dragon of the Dragon Empire, its skills are: the first skill, from the G zone, this card cannot be turned face up by abilities. If this card is face up, you can stride it without paying any stride cost. So for the first skill, as long as you stride Gilgal first as your first G unit, and the rest of the game you can stride him for no cost as long as you've got him face up in the G zone, making it a pretty good way to save up on hand costs and also to ensure striding in case you wish to stride him or if you have no other choice but to stride him. And the second skill of Gilgal, as a Vanguard, by Counterblasting 2 and Soul Blasting 1, if the cost has been paid, until the end of the turn, this unit battles all of your opponent's units in one attack, and it gets plus 10,000 power, and an additional skill. Whenever this unit's attack hits, you can countercharge 1. So as for Gilgal's skill, as long as you don't mind paying the hefty cost of Counterblast 2 and Soul Blast 1, you can attack all of your opponent's units at once, including Vanguard and Rearguards, have an additional 10,000 power to make those attacks more likely to hit, and for every successful hit by this unit's attack, he can countercharge 1, making it possible to refund nearly all of the counterblast that's used to pay for the skill, making Gilgal a pretty good G unit to use as your first stride. The Grade 4, G unit, Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Blazing Burst Dragon. Its skill is, as a Vanguard, Generation Break 8. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, you can retire all of your opponent's rear guards, and then all of your rear guards get plus 10,000 power until the end of the turn. And also, if 3 or more units were retired by this unit's skill, you can give your Vanguard Blazing Burst an additional 10,000 power and plus 1 critical. As for this skill of Blazing Burst Dragon, it's a pretty simple but very powerful skill. As long as you've got the Generation Break 8 active and ready, you can retire all of your opponent's rear guards for no cost. And the best part is, all of your rear guards get an additional huge boost of power. And also, if you've managed to retire 3 or more units with this unit's skill, you can then give your Vanguard additional power and critical, making Blazing Burst a very powerful Vanguard and rear guard supporter and a rear guard retirer. The Grade 4, Divine Dragon Knight, Barakat, one of the main G units to try in this deck. Its skill is, as a Vanguard, when this unit attacks, you can turn 1 card from your G zone face up if the cost has been paid. Then if your opponent has 3 or more open rearguard circles, this unit gets plus 10,000 power, plus 1 critical, and plus 1 drive until the end of the battle. And if your opponent has 5 or more open rearguard circles, all of your rearguards get plus 10,000 power until the end of the turn. So as for Barakat, as long as you manage to clear your opponent's field of rearguards beforehand, you can make Barakat into a very powerful Vanguard for the additional power, critical, and drive. And if you've managed to wipe out your opponent's field completely of rearguards, you can also give your entire field of rearguards a huge boost of power as well, making Barakat a very powerful Vanguard and rearguard retirer and rearguard supporter. The Grade 4 G Unit, Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Blade Master Titan. Its skills is, as a Vanguard, once per turn, Generation Break 2, by counterblasting 1 and turning 1 card in your G zone face up, choose the same number of cards on your opponent's rear guard as the same number of face up Blade Master Titans in your G zone and retire them. And then until the end of the turn, your Vanguard gets a skill. The skill is, if this unit is blazing, it gets plus 1 critical. And then the second ability, Blaze, as a Vanguard or rearguard, at the beginning of each of your attacks, if you have more rearguards than your opponent, your Vanguard enters the blazing state until the end of the turn. So as mentioned of the skill, as long as you manage to clear your opponent's field of rearguards beforehand, you can activate the blazing state, which lets you activate the plus 1 critical. And the best part is, as long as you've managed to flip over a bunch of Titans beforehand and use Titan's skill to flip another one in your G zone face up, you can retire up to 3 rear guards as long as you meet the right requirements, thus making Titan a good way to clear your opponent's field of rear guards and also to make your Vanguard have more devastating damage by getting the plus 1 critical. The Grade 4 G Unit, Flare General, Dumbshit Valor. Its skills are, the first skill, Blaze. So just like I explained in Blade Master Titan, what Blaze is and how it's activated, so I'm just going to skip ahead to the next skill. The second skill of Dumbshit Valor. As a Vanguard, when placed, counterblast 1 and turn 1 card in your G zone face up. If the cost has been paid, you can choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it, and then your Vanguard gets plus 15,000 power for every Sentinel in your drop zone. So as for the second skill, as long as you don't mind paying the counterblast of 1, you can retire one of your opponent's rear guards, and the best part is, stack a huge amount of power onto your Vanguard as long as you've managed to secure a number of Sentinels like Perfect Guards or Quintet Walls in your drop zone. And the best part is, this power-up skill is stackable since it gets plus 15,000 power for every Sentinel in your drop zone. So assuming you manage to fill your drop zone with plenty of Perfect Guards or Quintet Walls, it's possible to just keep on stacking the plus 15,000 power over and over. And the third skill of Dumbshit Valor, as a Vanguard, once per turn, when your opponent's Sentinel or G Guardian is placed, you may stand this blazing unit, but it gets minus 1 drive until the end of the turn. So during Dumbshit Valor's attack during your turn, if your opponent has chosen to guard with a Sentinel or G Guardian, you can then restand your Vanguard Dumbshit Valor at the mere cost of minusing your Vanguard's drive by 1, making Dumbshit Valor a very good Vanguard to have if you like to specialize in restanding after attacking with your Vanguards. The Grade 4 G Unit, Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Zanbus Dragon. Its skill is, as a Vanguard, once per turn, turn a card from your G zone face up, then retire all of your opponent's rear guards, and all of your Grade 3 or higher units get plus 10,000 power until the end of the turn. So as for Zanbus Dragon, he can retire all of your opponent's rear guards without paying any cost, but simply flipping cards in your G zone face up. And the best part is, all of your Grade 3 or greater units, including your Vanguard G unit, Zanbus Dragon, get plus 10,000 power. So if you're the type who likes to fill his front row with Grade 3s for attacking, Zanbus Dragon is a great G unit to have.
since he can retire rear guards with no cost and also give your entire front row a huge boost of power. The Grade 4 G unit, Supreme Heavenly Emperor Dragon, Extend Grave Dragon. The first skill, Blaze. But as I mentioned before, I already explained Blaze during the Blade Master Titan explanation, so I'm going to skip over the next skill. The second skill of Extend Grave Dragon is a Vanguard once per turn by counterblasting one and flipping a card in your G zone face up. If the cost has been paid, until the end of the turn, your Vanguard gets a skill. When this blazing unit attacks, you can draw one card and retire one of your opponent's rear guards. So, as for this skill, and it makes Extend Grave Dragon more or less like a basic G unit to have for your Kagero decks. As a mere counterblast of 1, you can, as long as you manage to retire your opponent's rear guards beforehand and get your Vanguard to the blazing state, you can not only increase your hand size, but also retire your opponent's rear guards, making this a pretty helpful card to have in your Cardfight Vanguard Kagero decks, either G standard formats or premium formats. And with that, we just about explained the deck's G unit lineup. Next, let's get on to the G Guardians. And now for the G Guardian lineup. For the G Guardians of this deck, we have 1. Blaze Dragon Dance, Selima. 2. Flamewing Steel Beast, Denial Griffin. And 1. Divine Dragon Knight, Absalam. The Grade 4 G Guardian, Blaze Dragon Dance, Selima. Her skill is the number of cards discarded for your hand for the cost of this unit's skill is reduced by 1 for each of your opponent's open and rear guard circles. When this unit is placed on the Guardian Circle, you may Soul Blast 1 and discard 4 cards from your hand. If the cost has been paid, choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit until the end of battle. So with this skill, Selima is more or less like a potential perfect guard. As long as you pay the Soul Blast 1 and as long as you don't mind discarding a large number of cards in your hand, you can use her to completely block and attack. And the best part is, her cost is adjustable. As mentioned before, the hand cost can be reduced by the number of empty rearguard circles in your opponent's field. So if your opponent has 0 rear guards, then you can also pay only a mere Soul Blast for this cost. If you're the type to play a Kagero deck that specializes in retiring the opponent's rear guards, making this a very powerful G Guardian to use. The Grade 4 G Guardian, Flamewing Steel Beast, Denial Griffin. Its skill is, when used to guard against an attacking rear guard, you may pay the cost of Counterblast 1. If the cost has been paid, you may retire the attacking rear guard. So with this skill, Denial Griffin is kind of like a pseudo-perfect guard for opponent's rear guard attacks. As long as the opponent's attacking rear guard does not have any defensive skills like resist, you can pay a mere Counterblast of 1 to retire the attacking rear guard, thus stopping a potentially devastating attack and also clear your opponent's field of rear guards. The Grade 4 Divine Dragon Knight, Absalam. His skill is, when placed on the Guardian Circle to guard your Vanguard against an opponent's Vanguard, you may pay the cost of Counterblast 1. If the cost has been paid, Absalam gets 10,000 shield for every one of your opponent's open rearguard circles. So as long as you play a Kagero deck that specializes in retiring your opponent's rear guards, by the time you guard with Absalam, as long as you don't mind counterblasting 1 as the cost, you'll be able to use Absalam alone as a almost absolute defense against an opponent's Vanguard attack, as long as you manage to clear your opponent's field of rear guards beforehand. And with that just about covers the deck's G Guardian lineup. And now, after having just explained the deck's build and card effects, let's get on to the main playstyle. So for the main playstyle of this deck, just normally you gotta ride up to Grade 3 like usual. Try to make sure your Grade 3 Vanguard is Dragonic Lawkeeper. Then when it's time to call the rear guards, try to fill your back row with as many Wyvern Strike Membosses as you can. And for your front row rear guards, try to secure ones that specialize in retiring rear guards like your Torrid Cannon Dragon, Spillover Dragon, or Blazing Flare Dragon and Fire Rage Dragon. And then when it's time to stride a G unit, try to stride cards that specialize in opponent attack, retiring your opponent's rear guards and also benefiting from your opponent having no rear guards, like perhaps the Zanbus Dragon, Dumjit Valor, or the main G unit to strive this deck, Divine Dragonite Barakat, using skills from your rear guards to wipe out your opponent's field and then benefiting from them having no rear guards and giving your Vanguard and rear guards a potential power and additional effects. For example, with Divine Dragonite Barakat, as long as you manage to clear your opponent's field beforehand, like perhaps using these unit skills specifically, you can give your Vanguard Barakat additional critical and drive. And the best part is, all your units also get a huge boost of power, making your front row attackers like Blazing Flare Dragon and Fire Rage Dragon much more effective. And usually when it's time to pay for the flip one card in your G zone face up for these unit skills, try to use the Dragonic Blade Masters as the cost, seeing as how Blade Master's skill requires that you retire opponent's rear guards equal to the number of face up Blade Masters in your G zone. So when it's time to use the flip one card in your G zone face up for these skills of Zanbust, Dumjit Valor, or Barakat, Blade Master is a great cost to use for that skill. And like I mentioned before, for the main playstyle of this deck, so you just gotta fill your field with cards that benefit from your opponent having no rear guards. And then when it's time to strike and use cards that specialize in your opponent having no rear guards, like the Barakat, increasing your Vanguard's power and drive, and also using Blazing Flare Dragon's attacking skill. If your opponent has no rear guards, you can soul charge one and give him additional power. At the same time, there's also Fire Rage Dragon skill. When called and you pay the cost to send a card from your deck to the drop zone, retire the same number of cards as the grade of the drop card. But if no rear guards were retired by this skill, you can get +1 critical. So the +1 critical from Fire Rage's skill and the plus 10,000 power from Blazing Flare's skill go really well with Divine Dragonite Barakat and Zanbus Dragon, who empower your entire field, not just your Vanguard, making this a very powerful deck to play. So overall, that's the main playstyle of this deck. Right until it's time to go to grade 3, try to make sure your grade 3 is Dragonic Lawkeeper, strike G units like Zanbus Dragon, Dumjit Valor, and Divine Dragonite Barakat. Fill your back row with as many min bosses as you can, seeing as how this skill can limit your opponent's defensive options, since when boosted, if your opponent has no rear guards, if they wish to guard from the boosted attack by Memboss, they have to guard 2 more cards. So overall, it also goes well with the other unit skills. So yep, that's pretty much the main playstyle of this deck. Right until normally it's time to go to grade 3, make sure it's Dragonic Lawkeeper. Fill your back row with as many Membosses as you can, and try to get your front row with either these grade 2s, Turret Cannon, Spillover Dragon, or these grade 3s, Blazing Flare and Fire Rage. Take advantage of their skills and as well as your G unit skills to increase your Vanguard's power, clear out your opponent's rear guards, and to benefit from your opponent having no rear guards, giving your own rear guards a huge boost of power. Yep, so that's pretty much it. That's the main play style of this deck. And now here we are at the end. I've just about finished explaining the cards and the deck's deck build and the main playstyle meant to be used with this deck. So with that, that's just about all the time we have for today. First off, I want to say thank you to the viewers for watching today's video, and to please stay tuned for more videos I plan to upload again in the near future. I also hope you all show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to my videos and channel. And with that, I say goodbye and see you all soon.